I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest today is Elsa Vega-Perez. She's founder of El Fondo. El Fondo Boricua supports the recovery from the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Elsa, first of all, thank you for your work. Thank you for being Elsa, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Helen.
Talk about what's going on. What's the update on the recovery, relief, and the restoration
Absolutely.
that people are experiencing at home in Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. Well, you know, since Hurricane Maria, the devastation was a type, 0.5 hurricane, and it just devastated the island. The political unrest did not occur. The FEMA tensions and all of the issues that help in the restoration of a community of citizens of this country were not met. FEMA had regulations that did not actually meet the needs of the people. And so, for example, it also happened in Katrina in New Orleans,
Right.
when those homes were left for their families. Ancestry bought the property or earned the property, and those papers and those documents are missing. And FEMA needed those in order to comply with their requirements. So those homes were not serviced. They were left alone. So our recovery efforts were focused on immediate relief efforts, getting lights, getting water, and getting food.
Yeah.
And then once those were met, and as much as they could be met, we started looking at infrastructure and looking at some of the communities inside the internal part of the island. Those were the ones that were really suffering.
They were underreported all
Yes.
the way through. I mean, nobody seemed to care, or at least take the time to document the tremendous suffering that
Exactly.
occurred away from the coastline.
Exactly. You've got that right. It was all the surrounding San Juan, the more prosperous areas of the island, where privatization is taking place, and those people in the communities, in those hard-written communities, were left alone. So that's when we became more actively involved. We were able to mobilize a lot of the Congress in making sure that our stuff got through. Melissa Franson, our senator, she's Puerto Rican, she got involved. And then also organizations out of New York City, which we're more familiar with because I'm from there, we worked together to get some stuff into the island. But it was just a challenge in the early stages of the season.
You went there early on.
Yes, we went after the foundation started receiving a greater deal of money, and we invested over $300,000 on these efforts. So we said, let's go and see where our money's being spent.
Yes.
So once it became more accessible for us to travel, we did go out there, and we saw the work that we were doing was just really, really good work. Foundations that were being formed by communities themselves, organizing. I mean, you could see the real specialty of the community, of the people in the island, and how they were really building efforts to succeed and move forward.
When you got there, what were the first impressions you had? What did you think on your way, first of all? Because all of us were looking at the horrors of the experience on TV, watching CNN and the news media talk about how devastating this Hurricane Maria impact was. What were you fearing
I was
as you
fearing
boarded a plane going home, and what did you
But having had the opportunity to speak with family members, my aunt, my husband's aunt, families that lived there, a little bit less challenged than the other ones that were on the inside of the island, they would let us know. We got lights, we don't have lights, they come and go.
Sure.
My aunt, for example, in Vega Baja, she was without lights for almost 3 months.
Wow.
And then they came on and they'd go off again. She said, when we told the Titi we're on our way, what can we bring? She said, bring me some coffee. She just needed a cup of coffee. And so I was not surprised to see that was happening in the interior of the island. When we got to Puerto Rico, the airport was, fine, and anybody that had a generator was doing well on the island. You had a generator, you had lights, you had food, refrigeration.
Sure.
They were fine. And so the Airbnbs and the tourists were doing very well.
They were organized for
they
it.
were,
prepared.
absolutely.
Yeah. But ordinary people.
No, they were suffering. And the children, schools were closed. Schools were, teachers had left, came to the Americas, so when we went into the schools, the Twin Cities Mobile Jazz Project gave us instruments that we could take to them.
Wow.
Oh my God, that was so great. We had several musicians that went with us, Maria Isa, and we gave them the instruments. They were just in awe. And it was so nice. And the day that we got to the school, one of the school's lights had gone out, their toilets were gone. It was just a mess. But when we brought in those the musical instruments, the children were so happy, and it kind of like took away a little bit of that pain that they were suffering.
Sure. Music does that. Sharing and caring and giving does that as well. You know, I just remember how a lot of the discussions that were held then and that continue today look at and criticize our government's response. And from my point of view, you know, we deserve a failing grade for addressing the gravity of the issue. And what I discovered is a willingness to turn away from or even to blame the victims of the natural disaster. It's almost as if our country's attitude was almost as if the people of Puerto Rico, American citizens, created the disaster because they wanted a handout. Crazy.
It's so sad. It's so sad.
Insulting, but racist.
Absolutely.
From my point of view. I don't know what's the discussion like?
Absolutely, it was racist. And it was something that is degrading. You know, like the Puerto Ricans have always felt proud about their citizenship. You know, we felt, wow, we're Americans,
That's
you know,
right.
and we came and left the island and came to the United States and go back and forth, and the contributions.
Lead the nation in military service?
Yeah.
You know, with honor and valor? Absolutely.
So when this came down on us, it was like we were waiting to see the response and see it being better nurtured. But no, he came and threw paper towels to the people and thinking that, I don't know what he was thinking. And then also the lack of response, you know, and blaming the debt crisis that Puerto Rico is suffering to the people. And the people had no right to that debt. It was a governmental debt.
That's right.
You know, and then they privatized and they bought all these bonds and structures and they infiltrated, you know, our economic system. And so the people being blamed for that debt and the people that were suffering were not the ones that should have been blamed or suffering.
That's right. I'm Al McFarlane. My guest is Elsa Vega-Perez. She is the leader of El Fondo Boricua Advisors.
Yes, sir.
And has the mission of continuing efforts to restore, to heal from the disaster of Hurricane Maria in 2017.
Yes.
That impacted the Caribbean in general, but Puerto Rico very specifically. And one of the things you're doing now just to keep the information going is partnering with organizations like the Ordway to bring in one of the masters of music to focus and to bring joy to our community here. Talk about the visit of Eddie Palmieri.
Absolutely. Eddie Palmieri is a legend of Puerto Rican music. He is known for his great Latin jazz and all his musical works, Grammy Award winner. When I spoke with his son, Eddie Jr., about, you know, what had been happening and how was Eddie, and because we're friends, and I told him about our work with El Fondo, and he says, you know, Elsa, let's see if we can get Eddie out there. And so for a really reasonable cost, because he charges a lot in Minnesota, you know, we don't have the population, but he agreed to help us come, and he's coming May 19th to the Ordway. And it's a great event. After his expenses are met, and they're really just reasonable, the funds, remaining funds, will go to El Fondo Boricua. All those tickets that we can sell, hopefully we can fill the house, we can certainly then pay Eddie and his 14-band musician, because he's bringing a full salsa band.
It's a big band.
It's a big band, but it's going to be a great night.
No, that should be wonderful. Well, he's got a stellar career as a musician, a band leader, and a cultural force, both in Puerto Rico and in the world, I think. And so I think, you know, America, all of us who are here will just revel in this exploration of Latin jazz and salsa.
Yes, indeed.
It'll be great. What else are you doing to keep people plugged in? What else can people do? What can our listeners do to support El Fondo?
Well, you know, it's a donor base. They can visit our website at elfondoboricua.org, and they can make a donation. They could see where our money has been going. All the funds that go towards efforts for Puerto Rico do not include administrative fees. It has to go to the project. People that may know of a nonprofit, they should call us and let me know, what that nonprofit is, and we can vet them through the foundation, and they can request a grant. So all the foundation will vet the organizations. They have to be a 501c3. And if you are working with recovery efforts, we're ready.
Great, great. Talk a bit about Minnesota's Puerto Rican community.
Sure.
Soto Rica, right?
Soto Rico.
Yeah,
Soto Rico.
Soto Rico, okay.
That's my daughter, my son.
Maria Isa,
Yeah.
her term.
Yeah.
But talk about the community, because it's got a history.
It does.
It's got a rich history.
Yes, it does. We have been, since I've been here over 46 years, we have seen the growth of the Puerto Rican community, and we've also integrated our culture into many of the things, the Ordway, the neighborhood house. We started organizations, El Arcoiris, which is a performing dance company. We have advocacy efforts, Boricuas in Minnesota, Puerto Ricans in Minnesota, so you could see a large group of Puerto Ricans that are serious about continuing the efforts to build Puerto Rico, to educate about Puerto Rico. One of the components in the Ordway is before the show, there'll be an exhibit of Puerto Rico with artists and also an understanding of where we stand with Puerto Rico. There's 3 issues that we're concerned about. It's the environmental issue, which is a general issue that affects the entire society. We have natural resources and need protection. We also have the Jones Act, which is an outdated regulation that keeps Puerto Rico from prospering to activate their ports and those
That means
shipments.
nobody can ship directly into Puerto Rico. They have to come to a U.S. port before they ship goods and services, which means the prices are sky high.
Exactly.
And it suppresses trade, free trade, in a place where free trade ought to be as available here as it is anywhere else in the country.
There you get it.
But we're locked out, right?
And
This
there's
is like
three majors, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Alaska are subjected to those terms. And they really shouldn't be, because it doesn't really help them to sustain themselves and keep them mobilized. So that's one of the concerns. And then the other one is the La Junta, which is what President Obama tried to compose to deal with the debt crisis. No one's Puerto Rican on that board. There aren't any, people living on the island on that board. So we're trying to see how we can best reconstruct that and see whether they're willing to at least integrate that and make it more reasonable so that people can participate in that format.
What has happened with the long-standing debate over decades over whether statehood or whether independence? Can I ask you to talk about that at all?
Absolutely.
Just give me an assessment.
I'll give you my opinion.
Yeah,
sure. Puerto Rico, the statehood issue is still debatable. Every time it has reached a referendum, the nationalists and the status quo want to keep it as the status quo, so they override the position for statehood. I don't want statehood personally. I think that Puerto Rico could survive. I think we could certainly build relationships with the USA and keep us in the forefront. But I would love it to keep its own nationality, its own language, and it really could survive. If it's given the right resources in support of a survival.
Okay, great. That's a good answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, what else is Fondo working on? What other projects do you have going right now?
Right now, it's just basically helping fund the projects that are out there. We plan to make another trip probably next fall, September, and just to see where the rest of the funds. One of the things that now that they are in recovery stage, and some have recovered well, we're now looking at helping build infrastructure, solar panels, water streams in those communities that really suffered the most. And so that's where our funds are being raised to help build those communities.
Let's give people the phone number or the email address or the website one more time.
Yes.
So they can connect and they can support, because anybody listening or watching can be a part of the solution.
Absolutely.
This is about creating a community of solution makers, right?
And that's really what we're looking forward to educate people that Puerto Rico is part of this country, we're citizens of this country, and that we should build relationships, And our website is www.elfondo, Boricua, Boricua.org. elfondoboricua.org.
Okay, Elsa, thank you so very
My
much.
pleasure.
Good to see you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good, good. So, I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Remember this important work. You know, as I'm saying, we're building community together, neighborhood by neighborhood, you know, sort of family by family.
Yes,
and
indeed.
we owe it to each other to be the best that we can be for each other. Join us again next time for another edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane.
Thank you.